It's called Bring It In. We're kicking off Sneaker Week on Bring It In today. We just published a story from our guest who's in a park in New Jersey, Ben Aronson. Thank you for joining us, sir.
How you doing? Thank you for having me.
Can we visit with Duke for a second?
Yeah, he's chilling.
Oh, what's up, buddy? That's the show. That's all we're going to do. That's what we want.
He's at a sneaker angle right now.
Yeah. So, Ben, you wrote an amazing story for us. Thank you very much. And I just remembered it actually started. I had forgotten about this. It started with you and I were talking about Romeo Travis.
Yep. Yeah. And a tweet that you saw him. It sounds weird. I'm going to use tweet twice. A tweet that you saw him tweet, a couple months ago.
Yeah. So Judy's showing it now, but there was a Complex Sneakers had a little video that was kind of mocking that Walmart had knockoffs of like every famous sneaker. And then Romeo Travis, who is one of LeBron James' close friends from high school, tweeted that he was one of the kids who wore knockoffs, and it isn't funny to make fun of them, is what he said. Which just started a whole, just talk me through what your reaction to that.
I kind of sat here from like both sides of it immediately because, Henry, your first thing was, hey, this is crazy. This is like a shot at LeBron, and to me, I was like, it is, but it actually is also kind of a shot at just sneaker culture in general, right? And we got into this whole philosophical argument because while I didn't even know there was a knockoff Jordan market as a kid, right? But I knew I couldn't afford Jordans, right? And so I probably would have been a kid wearing knockoffs if I even had access. I won't lie. I did used to drive into Chinatown when I was like 12 years old, buy fake Oakleys, and then sell them at lunch in middle school. Along with like
you were going to confess to a crime today. I didn't know that was part of the show.
At 12, I don't think I knew that they were fake. I just knew they were cheap. But I think the statute of limitations, I think I'm good.
Well, you're good on the Oakleys. Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that it just led to this whole conversation because of what I do and what you do, Henry, which is push and prod a story out of somebody.
So can you tell us just about going to the Wayne Hills Mall with your mom?
Yeah. So I don't know, like Wayne Hills Mall kind of still exists, but it's really a mall of a different era. Those like local community malls where there were like 7 stores. I don't know if people remember those like photo stores where it was always like family photos, everybody dressed in like white, right? Like with like a red tie. And it was just ridiculous. But like I like every other little kid in America was obsessed with Michael Jordan, right? I didn't have a dad, so I didn't have anybody guiding me to like New York Knicks allegiance or anything like that. But for me, Jordan was probably the most iconic human on earth outside of maybe Michael Jackson, right? Those like Bad and Thriller albums were crazy too. But, I remember for whatever reason, I have just such this vivid memory of when the Jordan 7 Air Jordans from the commercials with Bugs Bunny came out, just really, really wanting them and thinking for whatever reason I was going to get them that year. So dragged my mom to the store, flew past Sam Goody, the arcade, all that stuff. And it just became this futile negotiation with a grown man dressed as a referee, myself and my mom, which ended at the sale rack and probably some like corny Etonics or something like that were like $70, right?
It just tore up your soul.
It did, and it was just one of those things that I feel like I wasn't mad that we couldn't afford them. I understood that we couldn't afford them, that they were expensive, or whatever the idea of being too expensive to buy is. But at the same standpoint, it's still disappointing when you're 12, when you're 10, when you're 11, right? Like you still don't fully understand the idea of like, it's okay, And that kind of set me off because I didn't have a pair of Jordans till I was 20 and working like 3 jobs in college. And even then, the sneaker craze in the late 90s, early 2000s was more like you'd go to Foot Locker and you'd get like 2 pairs of shoes for like 99 bucks. I don't know if people remember that, but it was like a period. So it was less about elite high-end culture, sneaker culture, and more just about like style in general.
Wait, so Ben, this 3 jobs thing interests me. You were making $9 an hour or whatever, and you would use that money on very expensive sneakers?
Yeah, so I was in college. I was a walk-on wrestler. I used to work my work study, being the manager for the basketball team because I just loved basketball and I was friends with the guys. And so I was like, oh, so I can get paid to just be at practices and games. I was like, all right, this is no brainer, right? And then I delivered pizzas 2 nights a week for Campus Pizza. And then I waited tables at like a sports bar restaurant called Starters 2 nights a week. So I was working 3 jobs, and for some reason I could rationalize spending money on sneakers like once a week. I don't know what rational world I lived in, being I was at University.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Were all your friends doing the same thing?
My close friends, everybody was spending money frivolously, right? So let's just be honest. It's just a college thing, right? Whether you're spending it on like drinking or Cancun, like I never took a spring break, probably because I spent all my money stupid during the year, but everybody spent their money stupidly. My best friend Mo and I actually used to go to Foot Locker to get sneakers and we'd split it. So the 2 for $99 deal or 2 for $89 deal, he would get a pair, I'd get a pair, and we'd split it. But my other friends were like big into like CDs and like car stereo equipment, which at the time was not my thing, right? Or concert tickets. Those were not my thing. So yeah, I mean, I would say it was standard. But I will say, like my whole life, I was friends with I was friends with a lot of like minority kids because I was often the non-rich white kid around a lot of rich white kids.
Yeah.
Right. In high school, I was one of the few white kids at a very exclusive prep school in Montclair, New Jersey that wasn't wealthy. And so I became much better friends with the Black, Hispanic, predominantly kids who came in from Newark on scholarship. And I just felt more akin to them. And likewise in college as well. And I will say in those communities, sneakers and kind of that style did matter a bit more than maybe in the organic community in which I was born, if you will.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
You know, to be honest, I never really knew until I started talking. You know, there's like those social stereotypes where people are like, oh, they just want, they being Black people, and this is like typically white people speaking down, right? It's like, oh, like nobody taught them how to like value money the right way, or they're just irresponsible. This is how you, and it's just idiotic. And I never believed that that it was some sort of innate cultural thing. But on the other hand, you would speak to people like my good friend Waz and Jerv, and there were some cultural truths to the idea that fashion meant more. Ironically, I'm big into like anything that's like socially minded, I will give a shot from a content perspective. And there's a new show on Netflix called Black as Fuck by the guy who made Blackish, and a bunch of other shows, Kenya Barris. And while it's definitely tonally set for more of a kind of older, less knowledgeable audience, there's always bits of insight that you glimmer. And the first episode is all about how fashion culture means so much to Black America. And it actually, if this is true, I mean, it's the first time I'd seen it. It dates back to when slavery first kind of was abolished, and Black people felt like the only way they were taken seriously was in their Sunday best, right? And the only way to feel respected, to feel honored, so getting dressed up became a way of feeling like you had respect of non-Black people. And that's an awful truth to, if that is the case, again, because I have not researched it, I'm quoting somebody else's thing, but if that's the truth, that is an awful way to feel, right? To walk around and be like, the only way white people are going to respect me is if I look good.
It's the cheapest way to elevate your status. You can't do it via a house or a car nearly as inexpensively. Doesn't mean you should be doing it, obviously, but yeah, it's the tragedy of back in the 70s when I was a young man and I had friends who I knew the dad might be the janitor at a school and he was driving a huge Cadillac. And I didn't understand why until later I realized, well, he wasn't allowed to buy a house. He wanted to show up, he had a full-time job. And the only way to do it was to buy this huge depreciating asset. It's a huge part of our institutionally why we've been so awful, at least here. But I was just curious what your thought was on the sneaker thing, because I was coaching kids in the projects in the 80s when the craze really kind of hit. We had the Weapon. In fact, the only brand shoe I ever really bought was the Weapon because I love Magic and Bird. And our kids didn't really love the Weapon. Magic didn't have that kind of connection like Dr. J might have had. And then of course, when Jordan got to be really big, that's when things first started happening. Because before that, my guys didn't care about the brand. They wanted the colors to match our uniform. Like all my kids cared about. And then you could see that changing as Jordan started hitting, where it wasn't just a sneaker, it was a Jordan. And that was a first for me coaching kids at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And like when you follow the data, it tells the same story. Like the sneaker industry took off with Jordan largely, right? The perception around it. But also, if we're really honest, the marketability of Black athletes really changed at that point too. You could make an argument it changed to a certain extent with OJ, but not really, right? It still wasn't super mainstream America with products that were not specific to any category or interest, right? Like Michael Jordan selling you footwear or beverages, right? Like he was selling to the entire country immediately. And I think it changed everything almost overnight. But one of the, I think, unintended side effects of that is the pushback on Jordan was always, he was so apolitical, right? That he didn't care publicly, maybe he did personally, right? But he didn't care publicly about what maybe some of the negative side effects started to be in that space, right? About him not taking more political stands. But it is a tricky thing because everyone shouldn't have to be a political person, right? Like as long as you are living a socially acceptable life, right? You're not doing anything to inhibit the rights of others. You don't necessarily have to speak out, but at the same time, he was like the first to do so many things. And that sneaker industry just hit in a different way that it just became really interesting. But I think the most fascinating thing is about how Nike took that and it exposed it all totally differently in the early 2000s of the LeBron era, right? Where they shifted the conversation from being, hey, one shoe for everybody that you find everywhere, to being marketing is about culture, largely Black culture. And it's about finding these little cool niches of people and winning them, right? The quote unquote influencers before there was even a term influencers.
So Ben, let me stop you here for a second. This is what you do for a living now, right? You're very expert in this space. And this is why I love this connecting the Wayne Hills Mall to a meeting I'll probably be in later today, where there's something about, I remember Jade and I were in Harlem, the All-Star weekend that the Yeezys came out. And I can't remember the player we interviewed who was wearing them. I'd never seen anything like it. And I was curious then. I'm like, why is this the first person they sign up? Like, why is this working? Why is this what's cool this weekend? You have written an article on TrueHoop that's about this exact thing.
You know, I can't fully understand why it works so well, but what I can tell you is what the mechanism is built on, right?
Okay.
And it's built on the idea of, hey, you partner with the biggest creators of culture and you allow them to win their uber early adopter audiences, who then start spreading that through culture, right? Everett Rogers, this famous social psychologist, had it with the technology diffusion curve, right? The early adopters, mainstream mass, and how those things work. And we've seen it in high fashion for years, right? The runway shows have nothing to do with the clothes that you actually buy at Nordstrom's. And yet, what they do is they signal to the elite people who are at these fashion shows what colors, what angles, what styles are there. They then curate their wardrobes in a certain way, which trickles down to the kind of more mainstream buyer. And what happened with the sneaker industry is the people creating culture. And to be honest, it's actually broader than the sneaker industry. Look at everything right now. The people who are creating culture for the past 20, 30 years have been predominantly minority people. But what happened is the marketers realized, hey, we don't actually have to market everything mainstream. We can create these small little exclusive products aimed at those audiences. And when they co-sign on the high-end exclusive product, then mainstream people will just like the brand and go get whatever stuff they can afford, right? And, you know, it's super interesting because the sneaker industry blew up over the past, 8 to 10 years, in the sense of, oh, you now have secondary exchanges for sneakers, right? Like that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But prior to that, I mean, the sneaker industry was really for a small group of people, like largely mixed race. It was just sneakerheads. But it is transitioned because the way they've used mainstream marketing to really be about what you might call drip culture or anything like that, which is centered on high-end music artists, NBA athletes, rocking the most exclusive, most expensive stuff, and then hoping that builds a brand because their fans and friends, largely, again, minority individuals, will wear that stuff. And then all of a sudden, white America sees it and it's like, okay, cool. Like Nike is the only brand I want.
But then they'll go buy like the $60 Nikes at Dick's Sporting Goods and not the fancy high-end ones, right? This is what
exactly where all the sneaker brands make somewhere between 65 and 85% of their revenue is on what they'll call core, which is the stuff at Dick's and Foot Locker and whatnot.
And LeBron's an interesting character in this. Nike has really taken off during his years as their primary basketball pitch person rather than Jordan's. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so listen, there's a lot of things at play here in the sense of like Nike expanded from more or less, 7 or 8 sports to every sport. They were also at a period of one of the most rapid growth in the history of this country the past 20 years. But what you really see is the marketing went from being mainstream for everyone to, hey, we're going to surround culture. Look at who, and predominantly Black culture, look at who their top signees are across the board of the last 20 years. Serena Williams, LeBron James, Odell Beckham Jr., early Kanye. It is a heavy, heavy dose. And the sports which cater to white America, baseball, right? They had Jeter. What did it do? Right? Like it doesn't move culture. And by the way, Odell Beckham Jr., football cleats are like such a small segment, like smaller than basketball. But basketball is only like a fifth the size of the running market. Like, wow. They do not make inherent like huge amounts of money on basketball shoes. They're signing these people because of their macro influence.
So wow. when I was coaching in the 80s, at first you go to basketball camps and they'd be run by universities, run by individuals. Sometimes, like Pete Maravich had a camp here in Clearwater when I was growing up, before he passed, obviously. And then you had like a 5-star camp, which we've talked about, which was a collection of really good talent. Then in the late 80s, you started having Nike camp. I think was in Indianapolis, not Oregon, and they would bring in the top players in the country. I now realize why I didn't then. I just thought it was cool that Nike was doing it. And then Adidas started doing it. You had major sneaker wars between who went to Nike and who went to Adidas. Clearly, that was, as it still is now, a fight to start influencing those influencers right now and get them to be loyal to their brand. And I'm sure we'll be talking about this more. Maybe even, Ben, you'll talk about it some. The corruption at the college level for college basketball, for example, more so than I think college football. I don't think football has the same connection, even though it's a much more revenue-generating sport. It's the basketball coaches who are getting paid enormous sums of money by these sneaker companies and getting these players that are picking schools not because of the coach or because of the conference or how good they are, because that's where the sneaker company wants them to go. That is something we never dealt with the first 10 years I was a high school coach.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is I don't know. I watched the what I thought was a fantastic documentary. I'm now blanking on the name, but the HBO Adidas documentary that just came out.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody remember about Christian Dawkins?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the scheme.
The scheme, yes.
Yeah,
I thought it was fantastic. I don't know how much of it is, hey, the sneaker companies are able to literally dictate where the kids want to go, as much as the sneaker companies had been funneling money, and money is what dictates where people want to go. Because quite often the players have signed a different with different sneaker companies than the one that they supposedly took money from.
I think,
right?
Ben, my take is that what happens more commonly is it's sneaker company has the deep pockets in the scenario.
Yep.
And they can't legitimately just pay athletes. So they engage some sort of middleman, right? And that middle person has the deep pockets. Could be an AAU coach, could be some Christian Dawkins type, right? They get to direct everything, right?
That's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, right? Like, why does the money matter? And the ironic thing to me that actually shocked me is how little money it took to make people's decisions. It was like 20 grand. It was 40 grand. And while that's a lot of money, if you're talking about being somebody who's potentially worth tens of millions, to throw your draft stock in the mix for potentially taking 10 or 20 grand. But why does the money matter? The majority of these kids come from nothing, right? I highly doubt, even if he was a top prospect, right, that Steph Curry would have needed the money, or Klay Thompson would have needed the money and therefore wouldn't have taken it, because 10 grand they wouldn't have needed it. Quite often when you really look at these stories, the parents are involved, right? The Cam Newton scandals and things like that. Again, because kids need the money, and I don't blame them. Every single human involved is making money on this, except for the poorest people involved, who are also the draw. They are the business. Those kids can go play a summer league game and people would pay to be there.
It's just like the prostitution debate, right? Like, it's the same thing. Like, they could, if they wanted police prostitution, you go after the purchasers, right? Like that's the same thing here, right? Like, it's not OJ Mayo who needs a giant reform, it's anyway, well, let's not get lost on that. Like, so you're going to talk to us a little about the price of shoes and its effect. You have some pretty strong feelings about this.
So I think one of the most interesting things is that in the switch from Jordan to LeBron at an industry level, one of the biggest things that happened is sneaker prices kept going up, and the rate at which they rolled over the models increased, right? So now you've got tons of people with signature shoes, right? And they're rolling over the models 2 and 3 times a year when you include like colorway additions and all that. And they're increasing the cost. And yet the amount of money they make off these shoes is largely minimal, right? In the grand scheme of Nike's war chest of sneaker value, the actual value of LeBron's sneaker in the mix is not nearly what Jordan's is in terms of annual sales, but it's super important in terms of profile, in terms of what it means to have a pair of LeBrons. Additionally, who it's targeted at largely is, from a marketing sense, these sneakers tend to be targeted at urban minorities, right? Because those communities are deemed to be super influential, right? Do you guys remember, like 5 years ago, LeBron started posting these photos after the game with his teammates, showing off how they were dressed, right? It'd be him and Tristan Thomas, and even Kevin Love was in there sometimes, right? Everything was about showing off your style. And then, right, what do you see? For the most part, young Black kids, right, posting their photos looking just like that, showing off their style, right? And then that trickles down to mainstream America. And by mainstream America, I blatantly mean white America, right? But the problem is, if you look at the inequities in income, right, it is so messed up that the most expensive sneakers are targeted at the audiences who can least afford them. I believe, off the top of my head, a average Black American family makes $41,000 a year, whereas the average white American family makes about $60,000 a year, right? That is a huge discrepancy. It's a 50% difference in income. And yet white America is largely being sold the cheap models in middle America, in Bonton or Dick's or Cabela's or whatever. And, urban America is being sold the really expensive ones. And I just find that to be sad. And even though I've sat in the rooms where these audience targets get built, nobody's sitting there going, hey, let's take advantage of poor people. It's far more, hey, the coolest, most influential people in America right now are minorities. So how do we get them wearing our product? And that is an awesome step forward. The idea that Black, Hispanic, Asian people are valued in this country is a huge step forward. The irony to me, though, is when what they are being sold are the most expensive things. And that's the weird part.
Can I, when we're talking about this sort of cultural vibrancy, this kind of whatever it is that leads to a Yeezy being hot, is Michael Jordan sort of slightly overweight suburban guy in his giant living room, like, who doesn't know how to use his phone very well? Like, is he currently culturally vibrant?
Before this documentary, no.
Okay.
Like, before this documentary, and you actually hear Russillo talk about this a lot, like, we forget how young these kids are, right? Most of the people in the NBA right now were born right around the time or right after Jordan played his last game, right? They never saw him. Kobe is their guy. LeBron is their guy,
Steph.
right?
And Steph.
Yeah, and Steph, right? Yeah. For a minute. Steph, unfortunately, has lost a lot of his marketing cred, even though I think the dude is a monster, and I think he's disrespected constantly. But going back to it, I don't think Jordan is culturally relevant as a person player until this documentary. But his sneakers are, right? His sneakers have become iconic largely because the NBA players currently in the mix have made it so, right? But the other thing that's interesting is when I spoke to John Gervais, former ESPN producer, and current school teacher in Philadelphia public school system, that's not even the shoe that really moves the needle anymore. Most of these young kids are after more exclusive models. They're after Balenciaga sneakers. They're after Yeezys. The Jordans aren't even really what they're after, but what we are talking about culturally is still the same.
Yeah. So here's something I'm wondering, Ben. Henry's made a point a couple times recently where he at some point he thinks that it's players might realize we don't need arenas anymore that have seats, which means we don't need owners. We can run these things ourselves. Why can't LeBron, who you've already said has had this enormous influence, why can't he just launch his own sneaker brand and own that?
All right, so there's two parts of what you said, right? Let's start with the sneaker piece and then let's talk the league piece, right? So the sneaker piece, I've always said, I've had great conversations with Waz and Amin about this, that LeVar Ball's instinct was so right. He was just the wrong guy
Right.
with the wrong player to activate it, right? But I've also said he did it sloppily, like somebody who thought they could do it too easily. Like, I think that, let's pretend like Lonzo is Zion. I still think you take the deal, right, with Nike or with whoever for your first contract, and then with their money, you go finance the start of something else, right? So that's one. I definitely think that he had the right instincts. He's just not the right guy to execute it with not the right kid in terms of, like, Lonzo just didn't create style that way. He wasn't bigger than the game in a way that Zion and LeBron are.
Right.
So I definitely think LeBron could do that. Now let's talk the league thing, because interestingly, I've just become acquaintances with Paul Rabel, who's kind of the LeBron of lacrosse. He's arguably, the best lacrosse player of the past 15, 20 years. And he literally just started his own lacrosse league, the PLL. And he got all the players in who are playing, the best players in the world, to leave some of the other pro leagues and gave them stock options in this league. So they are owners and players, all of them. And they broke the model of attaching teams to specific cities and said, hey, we're going to move this like the big three to different cities around the country each game, right? So we're going to take the whole league and move it from city to city. And now what they're able to do is they are actually, in July, in the Olympic window, in partnership with NBC Sports, they are going to be running a bubble-like tournament for this live lacrosse, best players in the world, for 2 weeks, 16 days with NBC. And all the players are part owners. So I 100% believe you don't need owners anymore, right? The only reason we ever had owners in the first place is you needed people who could afford to pay salaries to people, right, to get this off the ground. Because starting any business will likely take a few years to have money to pay everybody what they're worth. But now, with all the top players largely well compensated and rich in basketball, and the brands really not being loyal to anybody but the players,
right,
I think you could go and start a league overnight.
I think there's a little bit of a, like, why do you pay a whole bunch of money for a certain brand? And part of it is like almost intellectual bullying, I would say. Like, you want to stand there and be like, you're going to argue with this, right? You're feeling insecure. You're a middle schooler. You don't want to get picked on. You want something that's just, fuck off. This is so fucking cool, this thing that I have, right? So Jordan, the word Jordan wins you an argument, right? It's Michael goddamn Jordan, right? So I think that's the insecurity, is like the NBA logo is what the owners stand for. If we don't need stadiums, they have this little thing behind them, right? It's like, it's the NBA. Whereas, like, what was the name of that lacrosse league you were talking about? Like, it's so there's
that was an amazing way to pull this back on track. It was unbelievable. Like, honestly, you could be Mike Greenberg with the way you saved that conversation. But what I would say is this: I actually think at this moment in time, the league name matters the least it has ever mattered. And we could have, you and I want to have this whole separate conversation about increasing or decreasing league revenue based on the season. But one of the principal reasons that you can even have that conversation is because, and we talk about this all the time, the NBA is marketed through Stars, the NFL is marketed through the Shield, right? And the problem is when we start bringing it back to sneakers and bringing it back to all of this is everything is about what the players stand for. Because in the US, NBA players are what soccer players, football players are everywhere else around the world. They are style and cultural icons. Now, the difference is soccer is a far more multicultural sport than basketball, right? In terms of like the complexion of the people who play it. And when we come back to this, I think that the interesting thing becomes, hey, how do we make it so that the kids who are the future LeBrons, Kevin Durant, the poor kids, right, in these lower income communities don't feel like they are less than if they do not have a particular shoe, right? Especially a really expensive one. And if we go back to the Romeo Travis thing, what sparked our conversation really deeply was the fact that that Stephon Marbury documentary had just come out. And I always knew he tried to do the $15 shoe. I grew up just outside of New York City. I always knew about Steph from the time he was in high school. I knew about the $15 shoe. And for everybody who doesn't know, it costs almost nothing to make a sneaker. The most expensive sneaker in the world, right? The actual production cost is a fraction of it, unlike a computer, for instance, or a car, where actually the cost and the retail price is unbelievably close. And LeBron was actually the person who shut it down. LeBron was so influential that he pretty much just came out with a quote that said, at Nike, we value more expensive things and higher quality. So I would never wear a $15 shoe. And almost overnight, the shoe got shut down. Like culture was just like, no.
Jeez.
And that's crazy.
And that's the giant, like, that's the whole point right there. When Romeo Travis is looking at the video, like, here are the knockoffs in Payless shoe stores, which everybody can afford. The question is, are you super uncool if you wear those to school? And effectively, LeBron is saying, yes, LeBron's primary income comes from that distinction. Pay a premium for a certain brand of shoe. And Romeo Travis is saying, hey, like, don't, you don't have to. Don't make fun of these. And it's tough to be in a business where that distinction is what pays for everything.
Yeah, and I think Ethan Strauss brought it up in his book really, really aptly, talking about how Kevin Durant's primary employer in any basketball is not the league, it's the sneaker company. But then also there's the secondary component of all of this, which is the idea that even the athletes themselves wrap their own self-worth up in what? The cost of their own shoe. Yeah. Kevin Durant coming out and saying, I'm not an $88 player, referring to the cost of his shoe, and seeing how that has increased the price of his shoe over time.
Yeah.
Right? And that's unbelievably sad. Like the idea that his own self-worth is wrapped up in the price of his shoe being more expensive.
He couldn't have afforded his own shoe when he played in middle school and high school.
Oh, hell no.
No.
A lot of us couldn't have.
Wait, before we bring Gerard in, Ben, let me ask you this: with your marketing brain, if somebody came to you with like, hey, we have 10 of the top 20 NBA players, we're going to start something like this lacrosse league, would you advise Nike or Adidas to write a huge check to be part of it?
All right, so if I were going to be the smartest about this, I would say that neither Nike or Adidas would actually want to block the other one from being a part of it, right? Because it would automatically create room for competition that would segment eyeballs and likely decrease the validity of the concept. So I think in reality, what you'd want to have is the players do it, and then the leagues, I mean, the sneaker brands kind of sponsor it collectively and just go, hey, listen, it's still in our collective best interest to do this. But yes, I do think that they should write checks to support it. And honestly, I do think that it could honestly be really successful. I think most people would tell you that even the big three is more successful than anybody thought it was going to be, right? Considering the fact that like the average NBA game, 700 something thousand viewers, is like the same amount of viewers as the first couple weeks of the AAFL, right? That football league that popped up and then went out of business, right? Like people love football, people like basketball, but people love the players, right? They love NBA players. If you guys haven't been to like a nightclub in New York or LA or Vegas when NBA guys walk in, it's unlike anything else. Period.
I was in a Starbucks last summer,
That's not a nightclub, David.
Right after RJ Barrett, got drafted. I was in a Starbucks in Times Square. My kids were out. My wife and daughter were at a show, and my son had met a friend, and it was a mob scene. It wasn't like Mick Jagger or the Beatles at Shea. It was just a lot of people reacting to a guy that had never played a game before. And if he had been a college football player, including even a Heisman Trophy winner, I don't think it would have been the same reaction.
Okay, so my next thing is, Ben, I'm going to pitch you a league. I just need you to get me some of that Nike money.
I'm in. Can I be CEO? How do I be CEO of the league?
That was my first thing I was going to say is what we want for you is to be the CEO. So that's great.
Awesome. I'm in.
Yeah, great. Gerard, I bet Gerard's just bursting to join this conversation. I can tell from what's happening in the comments, which are great. There he is.
What's up, guys? What's up, Ben?
What up, Gerard? How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you? How you liking Hoboken?
I feel like I went back to my 20s. No, but honestly, if there was ever a time to move back here, it's now. So it's not overrun with like 20-year-olds throwing, beer cans and shots of Fireball down everywhere. So it's not too bad.
Did you go to MKA? You said you went to an elite prep school.
Yes, I did.
I thought so.
On scholarship, just so we're clear.
No, listen, that school is not cheap. So this whole sneaker thing, right? And I'm loving this conversation, and there's all this sort of. Do you remember back in the 80s when there was all that chatter around kids getting shot and killed over Jordans, and it was this rallying point for, the mainstream white America to be like, see, look at these black people and what they do over sneakers. And I don't know what the actual numbers of that were, because I lived in East Flatbush, Brooklyn at the time, and that wasn't the safest neighborhood. I don't know anyone that got shot over Jordans. So I'm curious, what you know about that particular side of the story.
So I spoke to a bunch of people about it anecdotally, right? I couldn't find any stats on it, but I was exactly really curious about that. And by all accounts, that was a lot of media propaganda, right? There were a couple instances of it, and don't get me wrong, some dudes got jumped for their Jordans and not shot, right?
Yep, for sure.
But I wouldn't say that it was done at any more prevalence at the time where there was just higher crime rates in New York City anyway, as getting robbed for anything else of high value. Right. And I can't find any statistics that support that it was like this phenomenon. The only thing that I will say is I don't think before Jordans there would have been a shoe worth taking off somebody's feet.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, the weapon just didn't have the same capture. No pun intended. It just didn't.
Well, actually, when you were talking about that, there was some boldness in putting Jordan out front, right? The weapon was marketed with we got a white guy and a black guy, and you'll probably find something you like in there, right? This is one of the first things of Jordan Brand was just no, the brand is Jordan. That was exciting in and of itself, right? This is where David Stern says he took over this league that all his buddies said was too black to succeed, right? And he was very proud that they were able to market it to white America, right? This was his big accomplishment. It's happening right here in this moment of this Nike brand, right?
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, Ben.
No, go ahead, Gerard. I was actually pausing because I thought you were going to hop in. So go for it.
I was just going to say that to Henry's point, the idea of the Jordan brand and putting him out front, and to your earlier point, Ben, about how sneakers, you don't make that much money off of those high-end products. Jordan brand just had their first billion-dollar second quarter fiscal year 2020. And if you look at it, I can't imagine it's all based off of retros, right? They're so embedded in lifestyle and the culture that's where the bulk of that money comes from. And it's, yes, that one man and that jump man silhouette is the thing that's it's aspirational, right? You get this thing and it makes you feel like this. That's the biggest thing about buying. It's you purchase something and emotion comes out of you. I feel like something or someone.
Well, so there's actually this psychological state called enclosed cognition, where basically your actual sense of self-worth increases or improves when we look good, because you are looking in the mirror and seeing the perceptions that you believe others will have of you because of the brand or style or whatever it is you're wearing, right? It is why, like, all of our parents, even from, like, speaking to my poorest friends, had their parents before the first day of school buy them some new clothes, right? It was like, hey, like, everyone should feel good about who they are on their first day of school, right? But I think that the interesting thing is just the idea that, all right, for the most part in white America, there is less importance on that on day 2 of school and day 3 of school and day 4 of school. And that is a population who can afford, statistically, more clothes, more sneakers, more goods. And if it really does date back to the Sunday best thing from Black as Fuck, like, I feel even worse, because I hope everyone reads what I wrote and doesn't see this as like a white man critiquing how Black people act or behave or shop. That's not it. What I'm saying is they have an unfair deck stacked against them, right? They feel pressure to show off a sense of persona that is more than what they have, because they've been institutionally marginalized, right? And don't feel respected. Additionally, they are so cool at making do with whatever they do have that now companies are using the biggest, best, smartest marketing people, right? Don Drapers with tattoos, right? To try and win them over, because that's how you win mainstream America.
Well, it's respectability politics, right? If I put on the fancy stuff, white people will accept me. But the reality is that isn't true, right? But that's just sort of what is ingrained. Like, I have to do this in order to be accepted by the mainstream.
Ben, you spent a long time really wishing you had certain shoes that you couldn't afford, and then your life changed and you could afford them, and now you don't have very many anymore. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, started believing in having too much of anything when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, right? When I started getting paychecks where you could not feel awful about buying something new. You know what I mean? Like, listen, I have still to this day $2,000 a month student loans, right? I've got 3 degrees. I didn't have money, disposable income at all until I was like 30. And even then, we're talking hundreds of dollars disposable, not thousands or anything like that, right? But as soon as I started realizing I could have more, I remember looking in my closet one day and being like, this is disgusting. Who needs this much stuff? And I started like, I don't necessarily know if I'd call it a charity, but more of an initiative called the One for One Foundation, where it was like, hey, pick a number of sneakers, pick a number of pants, shoes, whatever, and just say you've got enough. And if you want to buy something new, totally cool. Give something else that's not being used to charity, right? But I even took that a step further. When I had my son, I was like, I need to really, really be more financially responsible. And ironically, it was while I was working on a pitch for one of the biggest sneaker brands in the world. I'm flying all over the world. I'm getting the opportunity to have free or discounted product all over the place. And trust me, I was getting some of it. But when I got home and I saw my shoe boxes, I was like, that's it, I'm done. I got rid of 30, 40 pairs of shoes, gave them all to the Bowery Mission. I wasn't selling them to make money. I was like, no, I'm going to put these shoes on the feet of people who need a shoe. And if that can actually make them feel better, if a homeless dude can have some, like, you know, fresh J's on, like, and they might feel better about themselves for a day, I feel so much better about myself. And that's okay. It is okay to feel good when you do good. That's something else, by the way, that people like try to shame you, like, oh, you did it for you. Listen, I do it for other people, but I do it so I can sleep at night, so that I can feel like I'm actually trying to do something different. But yeah, so now I maybe have 15, 17 pairs of shoes. Every single quarter, I go through my closet and I get rid of stuff and I give it to the mission. Because just because I was white didn't mean I was financially in a place where I could afford these things either. And I got trapped up in all this commercialism as well, right? And by the way, you can talk to anybody I went to high school with. I fought for the rights of people far less fortunate from me from the time I was in high school, right? I went to MKA, and all the kids who came from like inner city Newark on scholarship, they still had to wear a shirt and tie like the rest of us. But a lot of them, their families couldn't afford that shirt and tie. And so I stood up to the school and I said, listen, like, I can afford it. I can't afford the school, but I can afford the clothes to go to the school. But I was like, it's unfair. You have these kids in here to play sports and they need to go broke trying to afford a shirt and tie. I was like, give them a stipend to cover some clothes. And I say all this to say that, like, I'm not doing this like the way the war on drugs matters to white people now because opioids have come for them. I'm doing this because I just believe it is the right way to be, right? And I've been blessed to have smart people of different backgrounds, you know, open up to me about what this stuff does to them, to their community, how they felt certain ways. And I just want to help. I just want to be a dude like Chris Long taking a knee, you know, once in a while to show that this is not just a black people problem, right? We are all culpable.
How's Duke doing?
Right here.
What's up, buddy?
Show him.
If I could add one thing, Henry, to what Gerard said about it doesn't buy you respectability. Those of us who have the opportunity to talk to people that are playing, that are the potential influence makers, whether they're in the NBA or they aspire to be, and you get them when they're younger, that is exactly what we teach. Well, if we're smart, Gerard, is we have to teach them that as much as you want to be accepted, there's only one way to do it. Unfortunately, there's always going to be a good percentage of America that isn't going to accept you any other way except for your ability to play the sport. But if you wanted to make it somewhere, it doesn't matter what you're wearing, doesn't matter what shoe you have. You've got to be successful at what you're doing. Stop worrying about the other stuff. That's the same message I taught when we were in high school. It was easier for me because Jordans were just coming out as I was leaving the business. But I never let my guys worry about that stuff. If you want to wear a Malcolm X hat, because I was coaching when the movie came out, I made my guys read the book first. I didn't let them wear their X hat. If you want to wear, I love Malcolm X. I read his autobiography. You read it too. Then you can wear whatever you want. But you better know what you're representing so that you gain something from it. Otherwise, it's just for show. And the players loved it. They loved, learning about stuff and not just kind of being fake, which is why, to be honest, why there's so much focus on Black America. It's authentic. And that's what they're grabbing, I think, as much as anything. The authenticity of living is appealing to a much broader place. We got to be teaching all of our kids to be authentic. And that's one thing that isn't authentic is what you wear is who you are. It's not the case.
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
Because I offered a solution at the end of the article, Henry, and it was, and I'm going to actually steal a quote from the Beastie Boys documentary from MCA that I thought was brilliant. When they started questioning him as, how can you be the fight for the right to party guy and the girls guy, and then be standing up for like Buddhist principles and equality and blah, blah, blah. And his quote was, I'd rather be a hypocrite than the same person forever. And I thought it was an absolutely brilliant line that applies to the concept of a solution, which is, I genuinely think LeBron, who is one of the best, most socially minded people, pro athlete, celebrity, wealthy person in general, I almost wonder if he could have more of an impact than creating schools if he just forced Nike to make a $15 shoe and to say, I'm not selling $200 shoes anymore. I'm selling shoes that my community can afford. And by my community, I don't even just mean Black people. I mean all the people who came from his area of Akron, that community, which is more than just Black, right? It's about socioeconomically disadvantaged people. And I'm curious to you guys what you think about that.
Well, one thought I have is, So you explained very well that like these sort of culturally influential groups, which are the target of the marketing now, right, aren't even in and of themselves particularly moving a lot of cash. So it's like, to me, it's just now it's like, okay, you know, if you want NBA All-Stars to wear something, you get it in their gift bag at All-Star Weekend, right? Can't If you're Nike, would you rather have a $15 shoe because LeBron will make you do it, or would you rather just give those shoes to the celebrities, the influential people that you want to have them, right? Like does anybody who's actually influential, wouldn't be the market value, just give them the shoe?
And that's what they do. I mean, oftentimes the rich guys at the Emmys or the Oscars or whatever, that stuff's given away, and that's how it's marketed, right? Like they don't pay for that stuff.
No, but what I'm saying, Gerard, is like Ben's in meetings where they're planning how to reach like young, urban, influential people who might be 15, right?
Yeah, okay.
And so they can't afford $200 for LeBrons.
Give it to them for free. Yeah.
But it's worth a crap ton to Nike to have them wear LeBrons. So just give them the shoes.
I agree. I mean,
oh, Ben, we're losing
you.
you.
Got muted, Ben.
Oh, sorry. I don't think, like, you're talking about having to give away like 3 million pairs of shoes, right? You have to. It's almost like the whole argument about like making college free for everyone. There's a lot of financial complexities that are involved in that. When you actually talk about everyone, the difference with a $15 shoe is telling the industry the people you're trying to sell to matter as much as the people that you're trying to market to, right? And I think it's more an institutional statement, at least in my mind.
I think go ahead, Henry.
No, I think you're right, Ben. I'm more trying to think like a Nike, right? Which you could do better than I could, but like, what if 3 million would be if you supply to everyone, but if you give away 200,000, like that's a lot of Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, right? And you know, you have achieved some influence, which I think if you're Nike, you might think, well, at least we preserved our reputation at Dick's. Right? Like, whereas if the $15 shoe undermines the whole model forever, right?
But they do give a good amount, Henry. It's actually, I hadn't thought about this till you just said that. But if for all the better basketball teams in every state, those kids aren't paying anything. I don't know if the number is 200,000, but it's not 50,000. It's more than that.
Yeah.
So you're thinking like they're thinking.
But so Ben's written an article, which I have a copy of here.
I read it, yeah.
Where they're literally marketing to reach a certain group of people who are then forced to pay a bunch of money for these shoes, right? The problem is the cost of those shoes, right? So we're specifically not talking about the ones who are getting it for free now, right? Like we're talking about the ones who are having trouble affording the shoes now because they're the culturally influential teenagers, right? Like it's them. Right? It's specifically the ones who aren't getting it for free now. I'm like, if you're Nike, I think you might be like, hey, let's preserve LeBron's concept that $200 shoes do define cool, because there might be billions for us in the future from that concept. This is not what I want, of course, but to Ben's point, I'm like, I could see Nike fighting you tooth and nail on the idea that you could be cool in cheap shoes because they have a lot invested in that. They might want to just give away.
I mean, you can do a campaign where Nike identifies, right, like just kids in certain areas who, you know, and then they will then turn them into sort of social media stars, give them free shoes, because to Ben's point, the shoe costs nothing. What I wonder about this is, what is the dollar amount, and maybe it's not 15, that you knock off of a top end shoe, a LeBron, a KD, a Jordan, whatever, to then make it like it's still quote unquote high end and acceptable, but it's a price point that works, right? Because it's the capitalism machine that we're arguing over here. And Nike's position on, well, why sell for 2 if someone will pay 20 for it, right? Like, so I just wonder. And then on LeBron's standpoint, when you're someone who comes from nothing and then you get to a shoe company and they give you 200 million, 400 million, whatever the dollar amount is, how do you say no to that, right? Like, how are you like, nah, instead, let's do this $15 thing and do this instead, right? It's this idea of, again, well, you have so much, so okay if you do less. But we don't ask anyone else in the larger world to do that. We never ask billionaires to take less money, right? Like, so how do we decide that?
Well, so I think what you bring up.
Quick note, we're almost out of time. Good.
Okay.
Quick answer if you could.
Quick answer. So I think the challenge is, you're right. It should not be LeBron's problem to fix. It should not be Black America's problem to fix the problems that white executives and white America created. But at some point, if you want to be an agent of social change, you have to sacrifice. And I think that not only is LeBron that type of guy morally, he is about the only person socially who could pull it off, who if he did it, could literally change the industry. Because what you said, Henry, is right, but you were talking about it from the perspective of what would Nike want. I was talking about it from the perspective of like, could we make actual institutional change, betterment? Honestly, Zara has done it in clothes, right? Gen Z spends less on fashion, except for shoes, but they spend, $12 on a hoodie that has no name on it because they go, oh, well, fast fashion, you get rid of it anyway. So I do think there's something to this, also statistically, around building a multi-billion-dollar business around it.
This is fascinating. So Sneaker Week, Adina's husband's name is Chad, but he's known as Sneaker Galactus, which has got to be like, how do you earn a Galactus title? Come on, let's all get one of those. They will be here tomorrow. They know a lot about exactly what we're talking about, right? So and on and on through the week. But thank you so much, Ben. Thank you, David. Thank you, Gerard. We'll be here tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Thank you, Duke.
Be safe.
Take care,
Thank
guys.
all you guys.